Hi, lovelies. My name is Penny Blake. I use all, any pronouns. I'm a Romani, disabled storyteller and game designer. I have a red jumper, black velvet jacket, a black fedora, long black curly hair, which has some strands braided and dreadlocked. I have olive skin, hazel eyes, a nasal cannula, and facial paralysis on the left side of my face. I'm overjoyed to have been invited to the EUphoria channel today. It's a place where I always love to be because it's always so warm and welcoming. And I'm excited to be part of EUphoriaCon, which is a day of talks and panels and a day of community games, all built from the ground up to be accessible, diverse, and to build community across borders. This talk is about taking folk tales from our own cultures and turning them into playable games for our tables and community to enjoy. This area is my absolute passion, and I have invested most of my 46 years of life in it. I was raised in a family of story keepers. That's not our word for it, but it's a word I use to help those from other cultures engage with and understand that role within our culture. When I was 8 years old, I was invited to be inducted into that story keeping tradition, and it was impressed upon me the weight that I would be choosing to carry if I chose that path. It's a deeply spiritual path as well as a creative one because you are choosing to carry the stories of your ancestors. And in my clan, in my family, we believe that those ancestors are still with us, watching over us and guiding us through our lives. So to become a story keeper is to become a bridge between the living and the dead, a bridge between the past, the present, and the future, and a bridge between one generation and the next. So I became a story keeper and I still am. I turned my skill to professional storytelling and performance art for a number of years, and later as an adult, I earned a degree and a postgrad studying in depth about folklore, psychology, and world mythologies, and in particular, the intersection of folklore, multi marginalization, and LGBTQIA2 Soul Plus experience. But increasingly, I found myself, even at university, drawn to bring my own cultural stories to the gaming table. And I've now been doing that for over 20 years. So that is the place and the experience I am speaking to you from today. So today we are talking about bringing folklore and folk tales from our own cultures to the TTRPG table. And right from the start, I want to stress this is about using stories from our own cultures, not stealing or appropriating from others. I don't personally feel there's ever a time when I want to play a game based on folklore that is not from the game designer's culture. They're a huge turn off for me. It has so much potential to become problematic, and there's no need. Every culture is rich in folklore if we delve deep enough into it. And every culture has its own heroes who can bring those tales to life. So be the hero of your own culture and bring your own tales to the gaming table because that is the way to be authentic. I've already told you that my ethnicity is Roma, but who are Romani people and what place do these folk tales and stories have within our culture? Romani people are a diaspora of India, although we often get confused with Romanians because of the similarity of the name. We have historically been victims of both the slave trade and the Nazi Holocaust, and even today we suffer segregation and persecution around the world. At the heart of our culture has always been stories and songs. Not because we are carefree people who love to sing and dance no matter what life throws at us, but because we have been refugees for so long, disenfranchised and segregated from formal education systems that teach reading and writing. Stories and songs have been our only means of recording, expressing, preserving, and passing on our culture and history to the next generations. So, Romani culture, and all culture, in fact, including your culture, if you are listening to this, had many, many folk tales, songs, and stories. But there are considerations when bringing those fictional settings like a game format, or even fantasy fiction, not least because many of them are closed in our culture and so cannot be shared, and still more are of a sensitive or culturally nuanced nature that might be misunderstood by those coming to it without the correct history and context. So there are many considerations when we decide to bring folktale from our own culture to the gaming table. And for this talk today, I have broken those considerations down into three sections: passion, perspective, preservation. We'll look at each of these briefly in turn, and then we will look at the more practical and the more fun side of this, which is to actually turn a folktale into a playable game. So number one is passion. Passion is the place from which we begin to create our folklore-based game. Loving and embracing our own cultures, often in the face of adversity and hate, is important, and it's especially important to encourage in the next generations. I also passionately believe in bringing more variety of stories onto the world stage. It's vital to dig as deep as we can to see the way upper class white collectors of folk tales colonize the folk tales of their own indigenous communities and of the diaspora they came into contact with, including Roma. These stories, when they were written down in these twisted colonialized forms, stripped power away from common people and forced a new morality of obedience and conformity to morality and religion which served the purpose of maintaining an oppressive, patriarchal social order. Luckily, in many cultures like my own, most of our stories have been kept out of colonial hands and preserved orally to this day. Often, if people ask me, can I have your stories and publish them or make a game out of them? And the answer is always no, you can't. They're ours. Go and rescue your own stories. Every culture has its own stories, and if yours only exist in books, it's a labor of love to discover why that is. Who stole them and wrote them down? Who took them out of the mouths of the illiterate poor, the working classes, the ones who invented them and imprisoned them inside books and libraries and made them the property of academia? Bring these figures to account. Be passionate about stealing them back and stripping away the filth that they have become infected with. Today, more than ever, we need these ancient tales. Stories that are deliciously matriarchal, fabulously queer, tales that revel joyfully in rebellion and reward disobedience, inquisitiveness, resourcefulness, and strength of community. Next up, we have perspective. Seeing our own perspective represented is powerful for us. As a secondary win, educating others about who we are is good too. But when it comes to game and fiction created by POC, the aim, the labor cannot be to educate others. That is their job to do the work to educate themselves. Showcasing our perspectives in the world must always be primarily for us and for our own. That does not mean it's closed at the point that it's published. A white West centric movie isn't closed anymore in this country to POC, but it clearly isn't written for POC as an audience. And so it's the same when I bring Romani culture and stories to my games. I am writing first and foremost for other Roma, but everyone, of course, is welcome to enjoy as well. And if people learn and grow from seeing our perspective represented, then that's wonderful. But it's vital to realize it's not the job of people of color to educate others, and it's not the job of people of color, global majority, to perform or present our cultures for white consumption. And last of all, we have preservation. With the erasure of safe spaces for us to come together physically as a community and share our tales and culture with the next generation, with forced assimilation and institutionalized racism in the form of cultural erasure, preservation of these tales becomes a sacred task and an evolving one. In the past, our language and stories were passed on within a very large family groups across families at action tans. Action tans are Roma stopping places, safe stopping places. But this happens less and less because of intentional cultural erasure and the need to assimilate if you want to survive within an alien and dominant culture. Children at school do not learn Roma stories. The very few non-white Western stories they present to children are, from my vast experience engaging with this topic at grassroots, whitewashed and often offensive and degrading versions of them, which paint POC as others, curiosity to be studied rather than members of the class and school and community who are being represented. So how do modern 2026 Romani children and other children from global majority groups learn and engage with their own cultures in an authentic and meaningful way? Well, when my kids were very little, they loved to listen to our stories. But as soon as they move beyond the sphere of the home into the world they must engage with to find work and friends, a world that's not their own, but in many ways built upon their generational wounds and designed to keep them caged in, how do we make sure they encounter themselves in the world? That they encounter their history, their worth, their voice, their experiences. We do this by creating games that have these goals baked deep into their core. And it is a vital work. And if you are Roma watching this, if you are global majority watching this, and if you are doing that work to keep your culture alive, then I see you. It's hard. I know what it is to fend off the hateful comment beneath your game, that was never written for those trolls, but for your own. And know what it is to pour yourself into these things and to second guess and to stress and to worry. Is it right that I'm bringing something so precious to us in front of eyes that are not ours? Because a lot of people in our community think we shouldn't do that. They think it better to actually let it die out than run the risk of it being appropriated or weaponized against us. But I clearly do not believe that. You're doing amazing, sacred, joyful work, and I see you and I applaud you. And if you're sitting there wondering, can I? Should I? It's not something I can answer, and you don't need my permission. But I would say if fear and self doubt are your only obstacles, then I really hope this talk erases those for you and lets you see the power and the value of sharing your stories through games. So, this is all the theory behind bringing folktales to the gaming table. Once you have decided on tales from your own culture, you're going to bring them with passion. You're going to bring your own cultural perspective. And you can feel satisfied knowing that you are doing the work of preserving these tales for the future. But how do you literally turn the story into a game? Some stories lend themselves easily to game adaptation, and others really don't. So, choosing your tale is important. A good tale to turn into a game is one with a clear antagonist, a clear goal, a queer, you could have it queer is always good, but a clear quest or problem which the players have to engage with or outwit or complete or otherwise overcome. For example, in my game, Is That You, Auntie? Players take the role of villagers trying to survive a visit from a monstrous entity who can be both benevolent and also destructive, depending on how it judges the hearts of the villagers. So there is a clear antagonist and a clear way to appease them. The next thing to consider is how the players will have agency and free will, and how will the story be allowed to end differently each time. Nobody wants to just play through a scripted story. So, how will you allow the folk tale to have alternate endings, depending on player choice and actions or on randomized game elements and chance? For example, in Is That You, Auntie? Player decisions govern the outcome of the game. But in Light in the Lantern, it's the cards you draw that eventually dictate the outcome. In both cases, players are not simply playing through the folk tale, they are playing within the context of the folk tale and the culture it had come from. It's worth making a sensitivity note here as well, because we are writing in a time when we can and should be self aware and design our games critically and with ethics and current affairs in mind. Many folk tales have child protagonists, and while there is nothing wrong with that, we as adult gamers need to be aware that we are not accidentally gamifying child suffering or presenting harm to children as an experience that can be played to in a game. There is nothing wrong with upping the age of the protagonist to make a folk tale suitable to become a. Once you know the story and the ways it could end, you need to pick a system that will support this kind of narrative. The focus is on the tale, and so you want to choose a system that won't eclipse, divert from, or overcomplicate the tale you are trying to tell. Often we see monsters from folklore turned into monsters from systems like D&D. But this removes them from their story, from their symbolism, from their cultural context, and often it whitewashes them so that the actual folk tale which they were meant to represent is lost. It works far better to make the tale itself the medium in which the players are going to be immersed in the story, in the game. In Bitty Doozy, players become the creatures from the folktale, and their task is to defend the sleeping humans from the creatures of the night. So choose a system that is going to allow the players to feel deeply immersed and embedded within the cultural context of the story. And do not just pluck a creature from folklore and slap it into an existing game world, because that severs its cultural ties and it robs it of the symbolism and the overall message of its existence. In Romani folklore, these stories and these creatures and archetypes come to us out of the dark forest and across the dreaming river. Building on the works of Carl Jung, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes explained how ancient folk tales have arisen through the centuries, not out of a vacuum, but out of the subconscious psyche, out of dreams and fears of violent lived experiences. For example, Auntie is the personification of an illness which affected lambs and even people many years ago in spring. Auntie's story, therefore, needs to immerse players in that world, in that time, in that fear of losing livestock and loved ones, and the implications of all that. If we strip this truth away and this context away from them, then we are not preserving anymore. We are not giving our cultural perspective anymore. We are whitewashing and offering tasteless sliced bread for bland consumption by others. And that is nothing to feel passionate about. We need to be authentic in our role as story keepers. And part of that labour is choosing the right system to help players engage authentically with the tale that we are trying to preserve. There is a horrible, soul-breaking moment in the series Carnival Row, where the main character, a fairy, walks into a museum and sees aspects of her own culture, including books and animals, and even people like herself, displayed behind glass as curiosities. And that is what we are trying to avoid. We are not recreating the Great Exhibition. We are inviting people to respectfully and deeply engage with the stories and motifs and symbolism that are woven deeply into our own history and carried in our hearts. I really hope this talk has inspired and empowered you to delve deeply into your own culture and develop a passion for preserving your own folk tales through the medium of TTRPGs. And if you do decide to make some, or if you already have, I would absolutely love you to draw my attention to them on Blue Sky so that I can help you share them far and wide because the world needs more authentic stories to engage with and bring us understanding from the past and hopefully for the future. I'd love to give a huge thank you before I say goodbye to EUphoria for inviting me to bring this topic to you today and for hosting this wonderful online event for us all. With their kind permission, I'd love to draw your attention to a fundraiser which I am organising at the moment to aid some of our dear Roma friends who have had their homes demolished and are working hard to rebuild their lives with strength, community, and dignity. You can read their story and find out how purchasing some Romani folktale inspired games can help support their recovery by clicking the link below this video. Thanks for being here for EUphoriaCon. Check out the rest of today's programming, support our sponsors, and follow EUphoria on all the socials.